Erev Shabbat Shalom Rabotai. We are continuing with our Mishna Yomi Masechet Shabbat. We are up to Perek Aleph Mishnah Bet. Today's Mishnah should be Le'ilu Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Aranbayev and Eliyahu ben Burchai Israelov Minuchatam Began Eden. Amen. In Mishnah Bet, the Mishnah departs from the laws of Shabbat. The Mishnah lists activities that are rabbinically forbidden on any afternoon of the week because they might make one forget to recite the Mincha prayer. The Rav explains that the reason the Tana teaches these laws here is because they resemble the law taught in the next Mishnah, which states that a person may not do certain activities shortly before Shabbat because he might forget and continue doing them after Shabbat begins. The Mishnah says, Lo yeshev adam lifnei sapar samuch lamincha ad sheitpalel. A person should not sit down in front of a barber to have his hair cut near the time for the mincha prayer until he has prayed. Just as a background, the Mefarshim explained to us, the time for reciting mincha, the afternoon prayer, begins 1/2 hour after midday, after chatzot, and ends at nightfall. If you notice the wording of the Mishnah, it says samuch lamincha, near the time for the mincha prayer, which the Mefarshim explain means within 1/2 hour. So therefore it comes out, since the mincha period begins 1/2 hour after midday, after chatzot, the prohibition that our Mishnah speaks about begins at chatzot itself. Therefore it's forbidden to start having one's hair cut from chatzot itself. Now, although much time remains after chatzot to finish the haircut and pray, the rabbis were concerned that the scissors might break and not be repaired until the time for saying mincha is over. And the Mishnah gives more examples. Lo yikenes adam lemerchatz, a person should not enter a bathhouse after chatzot before he has prayed mincha, which Mefarshim explain, even if he does not intend to bathe, but only to sit in the steam bath, because the rabbis were concerned he might become faint and not recover until the time for mincha has ended. Velo levusiki, a person should not enter a tannery, even if he enters a tannery only to inspect the hides, because he might find something wrong with them and be busy the whole afternoon fixing them. Velo le'echol, a person may not eat a meal, because even a small meal, the Mefarshim explained, because he might extend it through the afternoon. Velo ledin, a person should not serve as a judge from chatzot before praying mincha, and this halacha applies even if the court is meeting only to declare the verdict, to be posek halacha. They already went through the topic, the case, because if evidence to overturn the verdict is presented, the case will then have to be reopened, and that might last until nightfall. Now the Bir halacha tells us in Siman 232 Ot 2 in Dibur Matchil Busiki that the Mishnah lists these activities only as examples. The prohibition applies to all other similar activities as well. Now, for practical halacha, a person wants to know, am I allowed to get a haircut before I pray mincha? Am I allowed to eat before I pray mincha? Can I go to the bathhouse before I pray mincha? You must look at Shulchan Aruch, Siman Reish Lamed Bet 232, and the Nosei Kelim, the Mishnah Berurah, the Kaf HaChaim, the Akud Yosef, to see the practical halacha. Right now we're just learning the Mishnah. What to take out of it, you have to see in the practical halachot. The Mishnah continues, V'im itchilu en mafsikim. But if they had already begun any of these activities, they do not have to interrupt them to pray. Rather, they may finish and pray afterwards. And the Mefarshim explain, although they were forbidden to begin the activity, they do not have to interrupt it. However, one may continue the activity only if there is enough time to finish it and pray before nightfall. If there's not enough time for both, he must interrupt the activity immediately. And the Mishnah concludes now with the line that the Mefarshim are bothered with. Mafsikim lekot krit shema ve'mafsikim letfilah. We do interrupt these activities to recite the Shema prayer when the time to recite it arrives, but we do not interrupt them for prayer. Now, just to explain, we know one is biblically obligated to recite the Shema each morning during the first quarter of the day and each night between nightfall and dawn. Since this is a biblical obligation, one must interrupt one's activity to recite the Shema, even if enough time remains to do both. Now, prayer, when it says en mafsikim letfilah, we do not interrupt for prayer. Prayer refers to what we call Shemona Esrei or Amidah. One does not have to interrupt an activity in order to pray the Shemona Esrei, because unlike the Shema, the Shemona Esrei is only a rabbinic mitzvah. Now, the Mefarshim are bothered with the words of the Mishnah. It seems unnecessary. You already said that an activity does not have to be interrupted for the sake of praying mincha, which has Shemona Esrei, it has tefillah in it already. Therefore, the Gemara in Masechet Shabbat, page 11a, explains that this Mishnah, the last section, is referring to a special case. It's talking about exceptional scholars of earlier times, like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who studied the Torah all day long without any interruption, even to earn a livelihood. The Mishnah is teaching that even them, they must interrupt their studies to recite the Shema, but they never have to interrupt their studies for the Shemona Esrei, even if the time for praying will pass. Again, they were exceptional. They never interrupted it at all. This does not concern, this would not be applicable to us today. And that is, Rabotai, the end of Mishnah Bet. Mishnah Gimel begins with two rabbinic laws that apply on Friday shortly before Shabbat begins. Lo yetzeh achayat b'machto samuch lechashecha, shema yishkach v'yetzeh. A tailor may not go out with his needle close to nightfall, which the Be'er Halacha says is 1/2 hour before sunset on Friday, because he might forget that he's carrying it, and he might go out into the street with it after Shabbat has begun, which we know is a biblical transgression of carrying. Velo alavlar bekul moso, and a scribe may not go out with his pen close to nightfall on Friday for the same reason. And the Rav explains, a tailor may not go out with his needle close to nightfall, even if it's pinned to his garment, and a scribe may not go out with his pen, even if it's tucked behind his ear, because since they commonly carry these objects in this way, going out on Shabbat in this manner would violate a biblical prohibition. Now, anyone else, we know in Shulchan Aruch Siman 252 Halacha 6, anyone else is forbidden to go out carrying these objects before nightfall, only if he carries them in a usual manner in his hand. Otherwise, it wouldn't be biblical. It would be carrying it in an abnormal manner, as the Rav tells us. Right, the Mishnah continues now. Velo yifalet kelav velo yikra leor haner. One may not remove lice from his clothes or read by the light of an oil lamp on Shabbat, because he might tilt the lamp to make the flame bigger, which is a biblical transgression. The Mefarshim explain the oil in a lamp often moves away from the wick, causing the light to dim. This can be fixed by tilting the lamp so that the oil flows back towards the wick. One is biblically forbidden to do this on Shabbat because it falls under the melecha of mav'ir, lighting a fire, and therefore the rabbis prohibited doing certain things by lamplight on Shabbat because they were afraid that one might forget that it's Shabbat and tilt the lamp when its light dims. Be'emet amru, in truth they said, hachazan, which the Mefarshim explains, melamed tonokot, the teacher, hachazan roeh chanet tonokot korim, aval hu lo ikra. A teacher may look using the light of a lamp to see where the children should read, but he may not read the passage himself. And the Mefarshim explain, the teacher may glance into the scroll to see where the children should begin reading, because since he needs only a brief glance, the rabbis were not worried that he might forget that it's Shabbat and tilt the lamp. Now the children themselves, they may study by lamplight because they would not dare to tilt the lamp in the presence of their teachers. As the Rav says, Hatinokot korin ifnei rabban leor haner, the children can read in front of the teacher by the lamplight, shemat rabban alein, because the fear of their teacher is upon them. Aval hu lo ikra, the Rav says, kol haparsha, he may not read the entire paragraph, mipnei she'en ematan alav, because their fear, he has no fear from them. Ushmiratan lo havya shmira, them guarding him is not a sufficient guarding. Kayotzebo, the Mishnah continues, Lo yochal azav im azava mipnei ergel avera. A zav may not eat alone with a zava because that might lead to sin. We know a zav is a man who became tameh through a series of a certain type of bodily emission, as the Torah says in Sefer Vayikra, chapter 15, Psukim 1 through 15. And a zava is a woman who became tameh because she had a flow at an unusual point in her cycle. Same thing, Sefer Vayikra, chapter 15, Psukim 25 to 28. The Torah forbids marital relations with a zava. So the rabbis decreed that a zava may not eat with her husband so that they do not come to engage in marital relations. As the Rav says, Shemitoch Shem Mityachadim, if we allow them to seclude, if we allow them to have the meal together, Yavo Livon Zava Shi Bekaret, he will come to have relations with the zava, which is karet. And the Rav explains that the reason the Mishnah picked a case of zav and a zava is the ributa. It's for an extra chidush, an extra novelty. V'zav v'zava l'ributa nakat she'atashmish kashe lahen. For them, having relations is painful for both. V'ika lemeimar devaday lo yavo lidei hergel avera. So a person could claim, why would they have relations? It's painful for both of them. Nevertheless, afilu hachi lo yuchlu ze im zu. The rabbi still said they may not have a meal with each other out of concern for the sin. Now, how much more certainly when he is healthy that they would not be allowed. As the Mefarshim explain, this prohibition applies even when her husband is a zav, which makes relations painful for both of them, and certainly when the husband would be healthy and just the woman would be a zava, it would still be a asur. That's why the Mishnah picked the case of he's a zav as well. Why pick a case of he's a zav as well when it's painful for both of them? For sure, when he's not a zav and she's a zava, it's only painful for her. For sure, he would not be allowed to have the meal with her alone together. And that is on Abotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Everybody should have a Erev Shabbat Shalom. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.